So, my first question for the panel today, and for us to think about, is to look at being enterprising, innovative, and entrepreneurial approaches to running planning teams and engaging with people. I'm sure all of you on the panel today have some great experiences to share. But Artemis, would you like to start this one off by sharing your thoughts?
First, oh God. Yeah, so I guess for me, I've had the theme of disrupting local government for many, many years, and as a consultant for the past 15 odd years, going around the UK and fixing planning departments and other local authority departments, there were some very sort of recurring common themes that I found, and I think being brought into Lichfield, we've got a very progressive chief exec who comes from private practice, doesn't have a local authority background, and has a very business mind. And we found that we had a lot of things that aligned. And after about a year of contracting at Lichfield, he said, well, you know, I can't afford to keep paying you as a consultant. What's it going to take to make you go permanent? So, and I've always had these crazy big wacky ideas, and I said, well, this is what I want to do. And I wanted to create within the company arm of the council a planning service, but a planning service that not only dealt with planning applications on behalf of the local authority, but did a lot more for other local authorities. So it allowed us that sort of foundation and platform to go out and support other local authorities in what they were trying to do. So I set that up last April. We've just closed our first year of trading. It literally started with just me on that side of things for the first 3 to 4 months. And then I brought in Ian, who's just sat in the middle over there, as my planning manager. And I remember interviewing Ian, and I said, look, you know, I'm not going to lie. I can't tell you what you're going to be walking into. We are starting from nothing. You've got to be brave. And if you're willing to take that jump and come along this crazy journey, you're going to love it. And so far, Ian's been in post for almost a year and he hasn't quit yet. Having the freedom to set up the planning school at Lichfield's great, because it kind of solidifies and what I've been trying to do. And, you know, I'm a real big believer of it. And if it was there when I started in planning over 25 years ago, I think that is definitely the route that I would have taken, rather than the baptism of fire I had when, you know, you leave uni and you didn't even know how to use a scale ruler in those days.
And in Reading, nothing was happening. Lots of people were getting laid off. There were lots of planning applications that were consented. Nothing was happening. No investors were doing anything. And it was a really quite depressing place. There were huge socioeconomic problems. There were multi-cultural issues as well. Labour core, Conservative outside, boundary constraints, so much challenge. And actually, I was moved in the planning department into a business-facing role, the only business liaison officer for the whole authority. You'd call it economic development these days. And I started having conversations with the private sector about what would it take to turn the dial, you know, to get economic confidence going, make one thing happen. And once you get one thing happening, then a second thing could happen, and how you start creating momentum. And by working and really understanding business needs, and actually what a lot of them wanted was confidence, certainty. We brought lots of people down from London to Reading, because that even seemed miles away at the time. And it was a really interesting journey, and I became responsible for the economic policies in the local plan, as well as the transport policies. So I had a development management day job, then a policy job, and a business-facing job. So that cross-cutting kind of role helped me understand things from lots of different perspectives. And what we ended up doing was going back to those individual applications and renegotiating them. What would it take to make this happen was the question we asked ourselves. How do we get this moving? And in some cases, it might have been a tweak to a Section 106 agreement. In other cases, it might have been a timeline. Another thing might have been a new or variation. So we got things moving, and we brought all of the investors together in terms of a property showcase and actually got them talking to each other. And actually, we did start getting things going in Reading. We saw the Majeski staging, we saw Green Park, we saw the Oracle development. And once all of that started going, Reading really took off. But I think that sort of entrepreneurial, innovative kind of spirit comes from those hard yards of actually nothing happening. And actually, when you see people really suffering in a place and they don't have jobs and the town centre starts falling around, you do realise the importance of planning, and you do realise the importance of placemaking and people. A lot of what I do now, whether it's been with Taunton Vision or the work that we did at Central District Council through Bridgewater Vision, those sort of place-shaping, vision-led processes that aligns public sector ambition and private sector investment is true collaboration to the point where you can then expedite delivery through an application or a development consent order, or a local development order. So I still have that passion for making those things happen and getting them on the ground fundamentally to make a difference to people's lives, because I really do still think that one of the key roles of planners is to make a difference to our towns and communities, and there's nothing of value in refusing an application. For me, if you refuse something, it's a bit of a failure. I know we all need to say no sometimes, but actually working at something to make a success of it makes me feel really proud. And if you can do that in a way that we have done in Sedgemoor and Somerset, when you link it to local labour agreements and link it to work experience and apprenticeships and jobs and training centres, and you create that virtuous cycle, it's a real pleasure. So I think sometimes, the role of the planner is undervalued, and we do have a really, really strong role in entrepreneurship and innovation.
And I do think that's really interesting, isn't it, about when we do our day jobs, we don't always think that planning is entrepreneurial or innovative, but actually it very much is. And often we don't realise it, but we're actually innovating every day, trying to figure out how we take a scheme and how we move it forward in various different ways. So I think, Claire, you touched on something which I think would be very interesting for you three to explore on the panel. And that is the idea that public services and commercial mindsets and commercial entities can work together in tandem to deliver planning. I think that no matter which side, we always think we're on one side of the fence or the other. I have this conversation constantly and there is no fence. And I think that that's the whole point of wanting to have this conversation, really, is to talk about actually how no matter whether you work in a commercial aspect or you work more in the local authority aspect, about how everybody works together to deliver planning.
I think there is that perception of a them and us, public sector versus private sector. That is very much there, and I think in all of the authorities that I've worked in, it's been very much that feeling, and there is a lack of understanding about what each does and what they're trying to do. And I think for me, having worked both sides through my own practice and working in local authority, I try to re-educate people in local government and say, look, you just need to understand where they're coming from and why perhaps that agent or that developer is hounding you for a decision. It's a lot more than, they're not just being annoying, it's because there are so many things going on in the background, which is why they're waiting for this decision to happen. And it's not always the planner's faults, because there's so much that goes into making a decision, and it's not based on one person. It's a collaboration of lots of consultee comments and waiting for those to come in to be able to make that informed decision. So for me, I have tried very, very hard in all the authorities I've worked to sort of make planners understand the other side, but at the same time with all the developers and agents that I work with, to make them understand the pressures that local authority planners and everybody that works together to make a decision, what happens inside. And again, through our new company LWM Planning, I deliberately brought in planners from private sector to work in the company. And the reason for that is because they have an understanding of how that process works, that commercial side of planning works. And again, I'll use the word baptism of fire. You know, they a couple of them that came in were very shocked at how local authorities work. And, that's been a big learning curve. But I think, what will come out of it is that they will be far more enlightened and be, their CVs are going to look amazing.
I'm quite interested in, as well as how the planning profession works with community organisations as well, which is clearly not as big a chunk of your world as the private sector. But so recently, last year, we worked with a community organisation in a London borough who were kind of hitting up against the planning profession the whole time and challenging their local plan and trying to do something really creative. And it was something the planners were fazed by the fact there was a community organisation actually trying to take on their professional world. And it felt really interesting about moving kind of beyond the sort of the consultation and engagement that happens routinely that you will have to do, and thinking about like, how do you work more collaboratively with communities, and how do you think differently about how you engage and enter into conversations. And I think there will be more community-led housing in different ways, and it may well be small scale, but it's still there and it's interesting and it's worth supporting, because if that can be grown, that's a good, there's a lot of social benefits in that and a lot of really interesting things. So I think that's worth thinking about, and that's a challenge for the private sector, for local government. In some ways, the local government finds that easier, I think, because it's who they deal with normally. But it's still, as planners, you work in a world where your languages can be difficult, where your processes can be very inaccessible, where it can be really difficult to sort of explain why and how things are happening. And so to try and just think about how you kind of unblock those things as well, I think is really interesting.
It's a follow-on question from the last one. I just wanted to know, both from Artemis and Claire, how well development forums and agent forums are working to bridge that divide between public and private sector.
I think there's a sort of very fine line about how you do it and where you do it. The best example I can give, West Northamptonshire Council, which is one of the new unitary authorities. I can never say that. And it's huge. I mean, I literally had over 200 people reporting to me, and it was made up of 4 authorities. So you had 4 separate planning teams, 4 separate UDPs, 4 separate everything. And we had, and it's ingrained in my brain, over 168 parish councils. And you can imagine I had over 168 parish clerks hounding me, telling me how rubbish West Northamptonshire Planning Service was when I started. And I didn't know what to do, because it's huge, it's a beast. How do you deal with them? So what I did is I put myself out there and I set up a forum for parish councils, and they said, "Oh, we weren't expecting that," and I was braced. I was really braced to sort of be blasted with things. But actually, people kind of turned up, and they said, "Do you know what? It's so nice to meet somebody in person of authority that we can just talk to." I wasn't expecting that, and we ended up for 2 hours having this great 2-way conversation, and I felt that they felt like they were listened to. And there were 1 or 2 that wanted to have a bit of a poke. And I said, look, I've been brought in to try and resolve some of these issues. So I will do my best. And I'll say, I will take personal responsibility to make the changes that I can. And then that's when the relationship building started. And I think after about 6 to 8 months, you could see that change. So, it can work, but it doesn't always. But I think it really just does depend how you engage, how you approach that. I always put myself out there. I don't mind. I've been doing this job for 25 plus years. I've heard it. There's nothing I haven't heard. I've had things thrown at me. I've had everything done. So I've been chased by dogs. You name it. It's happened. So nothing surprises me anymore.
So I just wanted the panel to take a moment to think about how as women we make space for ourselves in areas of the development sector, either because we could be quite junior in that sector and we struggle to find our home or assert ourselves, or because generally speaking a big proportions of our sector have traditionally been male dominated. So I don't know which way to go on this one. Nicola, do you want to go first?
I think that issue of confidence is really, it's so important, and it's one of those things you kind of look back and you think, I used to be an unconfident person who felt, and now I feel I can do this. Now, what is it in me that changed? What is it in you that changes over time? And you learn that you can be this person at work who's like effective and does talk to people, and it's quite a difficult thing. It's one of those things you wish you could bottle it and you wish you could give it to people. You wish you could kind of go, this is not as difficult as you think. Like, this is in your head. You are stopping yourself. So I don't have the answer to that one. But that, I think, if you could, and the advice I tend to give to people quite a lot is just like, pretend you're someone else. Yeah. It's like, pretend you are that person who can do those things. Be that person. Like, put on your armor, put on your clothes, put on your makeup, whatever it is that makes you feel professional. Go and do it. And just self-care. Those things. But yeah, it remains tough. It remains really difficult.
No.
Mm.
Cool. Tough question.
Save the best till last.
Thank you. I think, as women and as leaders, I think, you can support other women in your team. And when you're recruiting, you can make sure your team is balanced. I think, a lot of the recruitment decisions I've made have always been on, the basis of potential, and actually ability to do the job. But I've always tried to make sure that, we have a strong presence of women in the team. I'm often, especially when I was dealing with Hinkley Point C, the only woman in the room. So when you're in, Department of Transport or nuclear, you often are. So I tend not to notice it so much now, which is probably a bit of a failing. But when you become used to it, you become part of the system. And I was asked actually a couple of weeks ago, how did I feel about the equalities, diversity of the meeting I was in? And then I realised that I was the only woman in the room again. But I hadn't noticed, but actually all the chaps had. So I think getting comfortable and being comfortable about holding your own space in the room is important. Know your worth, know your value, know what you want to achieve, and then pass that on to your colleagues. Coaching, I find, is really important, even if it's informal. Taking someone with the meeting to you, working on a case file, and that confidence loop is my kind of why loop, which is the case officer maybe saying, I'm going to ask for another BAT survey, or I'm going to ask for another amended plan. My response will always be, why? Why do you need it? Have you got enough information to make a decision at the earliest possible time now? And often that extra request or going around the system 15 times, often is actually about needing reassurance and checking. And actually, I'm sure there's a lot of time and effort and resource that can be saved by improving in confidence. And actually, the question I always have is that defensible? Is it a common sense decision? And if we can get that confidence and common sense approach built into young people, whether they're female or male, actually, I think the planning system and the service would be a lot better.
Very well said. Thank you. What?
Gosh, I don't know what else I can add to that, but I think I think things are a lot better now than they were, for sure. And in my career, I have seen that change. I've lived and breathed difficulties, especially early on in my career. I became a head of planning for a London authority at the age of 29. I was met with a lot of resistance to that. I would be the only woman in the room. And at one point, I think I was the only woman in the department as well. And, regularly told, we're not going to listen to you because what do you know? why don't you just go off, get married and have babies? You know, it's that kind of thing. And at the time it was shocking, but you kind of, I don't think it really sunk in for me until later on in life, when you look back and you think, oh my God, why did I put up with that? That's awful. You know, so that is one of the things through the sort of mentoring and coaching that I do, to that sort of whole confidence thing, is like, you know, you don't have to put up with these things. You can hold your own. And, you know, they say you can't hide from the truth, because the truth is the truth. And as long as you do everything in an upright manner and you're doing it for all the best motives, then nobody can shoot you down for that, you know, ultimately. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.